You're listening to Dakota Spotlight. My name is James Wallner. Welcome back to Meanwhile in Mankato, Lies, Silence, and Murder in Minnesota. This is Episode 4.
From the 1967 American Motors.
This is a brand new 1968 Pontiac GTO.
It's the hot one for 1969.
If you can handle the way people react to your 1970 Dodge Challenger, you could be Dodge material.
When Brian Hendrickson was shipped off to St. Cloud Penitentiary, the Minnesota prison system was under some strain. In the late 1960s, some were overcrowded, drug use was rampant, as were racial tensions, inmate protests, and even hunger strikes. While some were advocating for better conditions, others felt the state was going soft on crime, or at least soft on following through on punishment. Lawmakers and reformers were left asking a big question: were these institutions supposed to punish or rehabilitate? At the center of that question sat the state's parole boards. In those days, they were made up of part-time political appointees, but all of that was about to change. Lawmakers were looking at overhauling the system. One change was the new Office of Prison Ombudsman. This from a film about the program in the early 70s.
Beatrice Williams. He's an ombudsman for the prisoner's representative for the Minnesota State Prison System. His role as ombudsman is that of a mediator between the inmate and the system, someone to listen to the problem and see if anything reasonably can be done about it. Each contact with an inmate is followed by an in-person interview. Any complaint, justified or not, no matter how small, will be investigated by the ombudsman and his staff.
Williams and his office staff today presented a list of 17 recommendations. The recommendations include increased use of community resources like mental health facilities, reduction of isolation units.
Inside the walls, this program sounded like progress and offered hope for better conditions.
A prison is a society within a society. These men may be criminals, but they have special needs, require a special kind of understanding if rehabilitation is to be achieved.
But outside prison walls, not everyone was impressed. To some, the very existence of the ombudsman was another sign that Minnesota was coddling criminals, that the system was bending too far toward rehabilitation while dangerous men were walking free. And some were literally walking out the door, free, usually through the system of rehabilitation, but sometimes just by mistake, and the media was watching closely. In October of 1971, Minnesotans could open the newspaper and read about Michael Eugene Foster, who had been sentenced to 5 years for aggravated assault, then somehow accidentally released after only 6 weeks. It was a clerical error, they later called it. And then there were Fred Anthony Sino and David M. Cluck, both released in 1972. Not mistakes, but examples of how certain corners of Minnesota's correction system leaned hard toward rehabilitation and early release. Sino, a 65-year-old career criminal, walked free after just 4 months of a 5-year term. Cluck was only 26, but was already carrying a long felony rap sheet. He was granted parole after serving 4 months of a 20-year armed robbery sentence. The judges who had sentenced these criminals to legitimate terms called the parole board a monstrous abuse of authority, and the police, who had spent much time and resources solving these crimes and apprehending the perpetrators in the first place, they agreed. They said the parole board was endangering the public. One state senator had the following to say: "Every time I read the paper and someone's killed, I find the accused just got out of jail." This pressure from lawmakers, the press, the courts, and the police eventually forced the issue. The entire parole system was about to be torn down and rebuilt as a full-time professional authority, the Minnesota Corrections Authority. But by the time this was up and running, Brian Hendrickson had already walked out through the prison doors. And of course, we could spend hours debating punishment versus reform in the prison system. It's no simple topic with no simple answers, but that's a different conversation, maybe even a different podcast. What I want to point out is where Brian Hendrickson fell into all of this, and how this ultimately resulted in his path to freedom and a road to further crimes. And I use the words fell into it because it does feel like Brian often simply had good fortune. He was lucky in many ways. So much so that for a while I considered naming this season the luckiest murderer in Minnesota. But it's also hard to know how much of it was pure luck and how much was pure cunning and planning. Certainly he was just lucky that Miranda came along at just the right time, and he was fortunate to be dropped into the authority of the YCC. But there was this other piece of fortune for Brian, an ironic one, maybe the biggest of all. However harsh his days at St. Cloud may have been, however uncomfortable his bed, however bland the food, Brian never had to face one haunting possibility, one that kept other young men awake at night. A lot of them lost more than sleep over it. They lost their lives. I'm talking, of course, about Vietnam. Brian was the prime age to be drafted, but from the moment he confessed to pulling the trigger at Roth Fork truck stop and stealing the life of Ray Doms, the risk of him being drafted dropped to almost zero. While young men who had never harmed anyone were shipped off to Vietnam by the thousands to sleep in the mud and to die, Brian's crime became his shield, prison his refuge, a bunk, a roof, a library, and steady meals. Brian never attempted to escape from prison. Why would he? As long as the Vietnam War was going on, he was escaping plenty every single day when he woke up and waltzed down to the library or sometimes to arts and crafts classes to work on 2 mosaic stone pictures, gifts he was making for his younger siblings, Marla and Mark. Mark Hendrickson remembers.
1 foot, 1.5 foot by 5 foot rock pictures. I mean, one was a tiger and one was a dragon. He said Marla gets first pick because she's oldest, and so she picked the dragon, and I picked the tiger. And those things hung in our room until we were, ready to go to college.
While their brother sat in prison tinkering with his art creations, Mark was growing up while Gary Hendrickson was shipped off to Vietnam.
I got 2 Purple Hearts from Vietnam, too. I took a buckload of shrapnel on the side of my head and all that stuff.
Gary had followed Brian's criminal antics for years, and he had stopped falling for the tricks and for the lies.
He was just a pathological liar, man. I mean, he lied so much he believed his lies. I honestly believe that he probably actually believed he didn't do it. He didn't take ownership for anything. He got together with a minister at the prison, and they got him out.
So, when exactly did Brian Hendrickson walk free? Here's what I've pieced together. As we already know, he was sentenced in July of 1966 to up to 40 years for the crime he'd committed 10 months earlier. His first parole, noted as limited parole, was for 3 days over Christmas in 1970. Just 2 months later, in February of 71, Brian is getting out on conditional parole, 4.5 years after his trial, and just over 5 years after killing Ray Doms. Gary Hendrickson remembers his brother's parole well. He had returned from Vietnam by then and was playing basketball.
I was playing at Bethany Junior College in Mankato. Brian was prohibited from coming to the Mankato area. ever again. Part of his parole and all that stuff. Well, I'm going to college here, and I'm playing basketball. I'm on a scholarship. And one night, here he shows up in my dorm room. And I said, get your ass out here, man. He had a car, a Javelin or some, I don't know what the hell it was. But anyway, the water pump went out. So he didn't have any money. So I went down to the auto parts place, bought the water pump, put it in for him, and said, get out of here. I don't ever want to see you again. I was one phone call away from calling the cops. Say, get over here. Because I knew, my dad had told me part of his parole.
Apparently, Brian's parole officer never caught wind of his little trip to Mankato. If they had, maybe Brian wouldn't have been allowed to keep the new job the state had handed over to him as part of his parole.
The state of Minnesota, if you get paroled, they'll try and find you a job. And they did. They got him a job at a women's prison. I was shocked.
You heard Gary correctly. Just 4.5 years after walking into prison for murder, Brian was out on parole and working as a guard and counselor at the Minnesota Home School, a detention center once known as the Home School for Wayward Girls. It wasn't a school so much as a juvenile prison housing young offenders, and Brian Hendrickson, freshly out on parole, was standing watch over them. Mark Hendrickson again.
The fact that my brother only served 5 years in imprisonment for the death of somebody else just seems impossible to me. It's outlandish.
Gary Hendrickson again.
And I understood from my dad and from a couple other people that I had talked to that was kind of the norm. They wanted to get him off the streets and get him to work. The government was trying so hard at that time, or the courts, I should say, were trying so hard at that time to have reclamation projects out of young people. Everybody really wanted to go right to, as soon as they heard that mom had died shortly before, the sympathy vote was in there. And it's like, well, of course anything could happen. Really? Not for me. Not for me, it can't.
And if Brian's own brothers had these feelings, you can imagine what Ray Dom's loved ones felt, his family and his friends from Rapidan High School. Here is Roger Funson, Ray's fellow classmate in the Rapidan class of 65.
That's just impossible. I don't understand how he could get out killing someone with premeditated murder. He did plan a pretty good theft there. And to bring the shotgun along, he didn't get enough time.
Maybe this is the right time to mention something else we'll look at later. When Brian walked out of St. Cloud Penitentiary in 1971, he may have sworn to himself that he would never be back. But he would return, for a while anyway, 34 years later. In 2014, he was sentenced to 4 years for arson after attempting to burn down his girlfriend's home in Herman, Minnesota. In a later episode, we'll look at this and some of his other offenses. Attempting to understand how Brian Hendrickson ended up working at the Minnesota Home School has proved challenging. So has piecing together certain details of his first years outside prison walls. To do that properly, I would have needed two things: full access to Brian's records at the Department of Corrections, and the continued cooperation of Brian's ex-wife, a woman he married in 1973. Both of these sources seemed promising at first, then turned disappointing. When Dakota Spotlight asked the state of Minnesota to share Hendrickson's complete prison records, we were told to come back another day, specifically May 4th, 2048. Until then, those records remain restricted. What we did get, for now, were 2 mugshots and a list of his parole dates. And while Brian's ex-wife did speak with me once early on, it was only to hear me out and consider whether she wanted to participate. Soon after, she texted me and respectfully declined. I had so many questions for her. Questions like, when did she learn about the murder in Mankato? When did she learn the truth about it? Did Brian ever talk about the murder? Did Ray Doms haunt Brian's conscience? And while her unwillingness is frustrating, it's also somehow fitting and darkly poetic, because even now Brian's world seems to resist the truth, still stubbornly trying to run on his old M.O., obscure, evasive, and cloaked in lies and silence. Maybe it wasn't even his ex-wife choosing silence so much as the ghost of Brian Hendrickson himself slamming yet another door in my face and laughing at me from beyond a grave that doesn't exist. Still, despite the murky trails, I have been able to reconstruct some of those years with the help of news reporting, public records, and Brian's brothers, Mark and Gary. For example, perhaps Gary Hendrickson's words are the closest we'll ever get to an answer on Brian's conscience.
My dad asked me one time, he said, do you think his conscience bothers him? I don't think he's got one. That's what I told my dad.
We know that Brian Hendrickson walked out of St. Cloud Penitentiary in 1971 and stepped into his next role, guard at the Minnesota Home School, at just 23 years of age. And it was at this new job that he met his future wife, Carol. She worked there too. Here is Mark again, Brian's brother and Carol's brother-in-law. I should note that Brian and Carol eventually divorced.
Well, they met at the home school, which is where Brian worked right after he got released from prison. And I still believe that was an assignment that was part of his release. Carol worked there as well. She worked there before he did. But that's how they got to meet. And Carol's first impression of him was she wasn't impressed. I would suspect, and this is me guessing, but I would suspect that Brian probably figured out that she wasn't impressed by him, which would make him work all that much harder to win her over, and make it such that he would go after her.
Because by all reports, Brian was extremely manipulative.
But you wouldn't realize this. You don't. The thing of it is the kind of character that Brian was. You didn't realize that you were being manipulated. I mean, Carol, who's a very smart woman, she's got her master's degree. I mean, she said, I never knew I was being manipulated until it was too late. Anything that he could figure out that would put him in good stead with a person or a group of people or anything like that, he had lots of time and energy for that. Very, very good at manipulating circumstances. Extremely good con man.
Of course, back then, Mark had not figured this out yet. He was just 13 when his brother got married.
Brian, for me, was still, he still had the past, but I didn't know the true story of Brian. I didn't know, that he'd committed a crime, that was so heinous.
Despite Carol's lukewarm first impression of him, Brian and Carol became involved.
As she got to know him, he became quite the charmer, and she just said you couldn't help but be charmed by him.
They were married in February of 1973, less than 7 years after a judge sentenced him to prison for the murder of Ray Doms. Before long, a son was born. And as the 70s ticked on, while Brian was building a new life for himself, a life made lighter by a short stint behind bars and a war he'd never have to face, elsewhere in Minnesota, Michelle, the baby girl we met earlier, had started elementary school.
My name is Michelle. I grew up in southern Minnesota in a community of about 700 people.
At first, it wasn't easy to find Michelle. I didn't even know her name. All I had was a short newspaper clipping I'd stumbled across while trying to learn what became of that 17-year-old kid named Brian Lee Hendrickson, the one who killed a man at a gas station in 1965. That's where this whole thing started for me. What happens to a guy like that? So I started searching through old news archives, and then I came across something that stopped me cold. A brief article saying that an unnamed 14-year-old girl at the Minnesota Home for Girls had come forward accusing a prison guard of sexual assault. His name was Brian Lee Hendrickson. My first thought was, that can't be the same Hendrickson. The kid from Mankato would still be in prison then, surely. But incredibly, it was the same guy. Another article said he'd been arrested, tried, and later acquitted of the sexual assault allegations. And that's when I pulled the court records for that acquittal. And there it was, her name, Michelle. She's asked me not to use her last name.
I went to a small school. My dad worked at a packing plant, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom until probably when I was in 5th grade. And things were great. Childhood was fine. Seemed very normal. Everything was normal.
Those court records didn't just give me Michelle's name. They also painted a picture of the one-day trial and Brian Hendrickson's acquittal. It was her word against his. Brian, of course, denied it all, and so he was acquitted. Court documents prove that, against facility rules, Brian had taken her alone to another building on the grounds, a church, in fact, a chapel. In the basement was a locked room with pillows and blankets on the floor. Even so, he was acquitted. Michelle, you see, was painted as the troubled girl, the juvenile delinquent who made poor choices. As proof of her lack of credibility, her past mistakes were paraded before the jury. Skipping school, running away from home, drinking, smoking marijuana. She was involved in a mess with a stolen car. The defense asked why believe her over this fine young man, Mr. Hendrickson. After all, he was well-liked, a model employee. And of course, you're thinking, surely the jury also heard about his past too, right? I mean, his past mistakes, his petty crimes as a kid, or the time he stole a car at the age of 11, or that other thing he did when he walked into Roth Fork truck stop at the crossroads outside of Mankato, Minnesota, and shot Ray Doms not once, but twice at point-blank range. Certainly someone brought that up, right? No, nothing, not a single word. From what I have seen, I can't even be sure that anyone in the courtroom except Brian and maybe his wife sitting next to him even knew about the murder. And I keep telling myself I must be wrong. I must be missing something. Still, I do know this as a fact. Michelle didn't learn that Brian Hendrickson had ever murdered anyone until this year, 2025. And so what was not said at your trial, like you say, the defense attorney turns and says, well, why would you believe her? She's run away, she's stolen a car or whatever. But there's no one in this room saying the counter things. Well, why would you believe him? He killed somebody with a shotgun.
No, I never heard those words ever. Nope. Only time I heard those words is when Dakota Spotlight called.
Later in the series, we'll learn more about Michelle's experience at Sauk Centre, her recollections of Brian, and the trial. But quickly, here's Mark Hendrickson on what he thought when he heard about the allegations made against his brother.
What did I think? Brian asked me point blank, do you think I'm guilty of the rape? And I said, are you? And he said, of course not. And I said, then I'll believe you. And I let it go at that because I didn't have the courage to say, I don't believe you, because I didn't believe him. I thought if anybody claimed that he raped them, he probably did. If anybody, I would take almost anybody's word over his.
When I first discovered Michelle's maiden name in those court records, I knew I wanted to talk to her. I researched her as best I could from afar, and I could clearly see she'd turned her young, troubled life around and built a solid life for herself. She was married, running a business with her husband. I even found the phone number, but the thought of dialing it didn't sit right. These events had unfolded more than 40 years earlier. To simply call her out of the blue felt careless, maybe even harmful. What if this is all very triggering for her? What if her husband answered, unaware of that chapter of her past? What right did I have to blindside either of them? So I stepped back and I thought about it. I consulted with others. Finally, I turned to a journalist friend of mine in Minnesota, someone whose instincts I deeply respect and trust. I knew she would handle this initial contact with care. And I hoped that if Michelle chose to engage, hearing first from another woman rather from a man she'd never met, might make the experience a little less jarring. And in fact, her husband did answer that first phone call.
He actually must have called my landline, which is my office tied into my cell phone.
This is Rick, Michelle's husband. As it turned out, Michelle and Rick have no secrets from each other, so he was aware of it all. But of course, we didn't know that at the time of that first call.
She wanted to talk to Michelle, and then I asked her politely, I said, is this something I can help you with? And she said, well, I would like just to talk to her.
So Rick gave us Michelle's number. My journalist friend called it, got her voicemail, and left a message. And then we waited, and we prayed that this would not cause Michelle serious shock or harm.
She was almost in sticker shock when she got the phone call, and she got pretty emotional because I think it obviously brought back memories that she wanted to bury and never bring up again.
That voicemail just made me shake, made me cry, and I couldn't believe it.
But as time went on and we started talking with you, she knows that her story is going to be out there, and you're going to tell it the right way. Where she was when I first met her and to where she is today, I mean, she's a totally different woman. And does it still bother her in her high school days? Yeah, we just talked about it the other night. We talk about everything. I'm not only married to her, she's my best friend.
When we come back, we'll learn more about Michelle, how she ended up in the Minnesota Home for Girls, her memories of Brian, and the trial that followed. Michelle recalls having good friendships as a kid, doing your typical things with your pals.
Like, birthday parties with the girls, having sleepovers, playing in the park.
Michelle was the eldest of 4 children. She has memories of doing things with her family, camping and fishing on weekends now and then. But for the most part, her memories are of her parents working, leaving her alone a lot, which of course left ample time for watching those old 70s TV programs.
Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, Gilligan Island, House on the Prairie. Saturdays was cartoons.
And then there was her favorite TV show of all.
There used to be a show on Sunday nights called Solid Gold Dancers. Solid gold, when I grew up, I wanted to be a solid gold dancer because that was on Sunday nights. That was something I wanted to be a dancer, whether it was in like a musical or movies or whatever. Just I was intrigued by dancing. Me and the girls would always get together and we'd make up dance routines and things like that.
Michelle's young life took a sudden and drastic turn one year when she returned to school to begin the 8th grade. It was something she was not prepared for. For reasons she's never fully understood, she was suddenly an outcast, completely shunned and ostracized.
I never knew why at all, and it was very hard being in a small school. And I remember being so distraught, and I'd cry. I didn't want to go to school. My mother's like, "You're going to school," and I don't think she really listened to realize how terrible and how sad and how lonely it was. Nobody talked to you. Nobody even looked at you.
Not finding the support she needed at home, Michelle started looking for places to fit in.
My dad was home, go to work, he'd go to bed, my mom would be gone. So I just looked elsewhere for acceptance.
She met a guy a couple years older than her. He had a car. Michelle started drinking and skipping school. When her mom found out, she sent Michelle away to a drug and alcohol treatment center in another town.
I'll tell you what, that was, just to be a typical teen experimenting, and the next thing you know, you're in treatment. And it's with adults too. It's not just kids, it's with adults. I just remember, why am I even here? And it just made me be more resentful towards my mom. I just wanted some support from my mom, or to listen, or instead of putting a label on that, you're an alcoholic and a drug addict. Well, at that time, I don't believe I was.
After 30 days at treatment, it was time for her to come home again.
And imagine trying to come home after that long and trying to fit back in.
It didn't take too long before Michelle was in trouble again and was sent to AA meetings and then a halfway house where she met more young people who were looking for ways to cope. So one day, Michelle, another girl, and two guys decided together, let's get out of here. They drove to another town and hunkered down in a hotel to party. When they woke up the next day, one guy had left and he had taken his car with him. They were stranded.
So then we were walking, and the guy that was with us says, well, let's just get a vehicle.
So they stole a car. They took off for Wisconsin, where one of them had a relative. The other girl left the group, and now it was just Michelle and this guy. Michelle remembers crashing at his relative's home.
We stayed there a night, and I think he got some money from his relative, and then we headed to California, driving a stolen car.
At the time, Michelle simply felt that she had nothing to lose and nowhere to go.
I had nothing to lose. I had no friends at school. My mom's already mad, and I've been sent away and wasn't listening. So I thought, what do I have to lose? It's like I've already took off. So in my mind, I thought, well, let's just make the best of it. I thought.
Michelle rolled into California after 5 days with no money left. She had the address of a friend there, someone she'd met at a halfway house, and she went to his place. But in the end, the law caught up to Michelle, and she found herself back in Minnesota, in court for auto theft.
I had to go to court, and then my precautions was getting sent to detention center in Sauk Centre.
Still yet to come in season 12.
He would do anything to anybody.
I was about to get paroled, and I was asked by Brian if I wanted to go help clean the church.
Do you think for a minute that somebody that would pull the trigger and blow somebody's head off at 3 or 4 feet would think twice about raping somebody?
Well, wow, no, maybe this is because my mom was leaving. I get a privilege,
So the convicted murderer is passing judgment on like a 2-year-old kid or something.
Rapist.
Is that what you're telling us?
Massive judgment, and it goes beyond that.
I said he could have been a serial killer and nobody would have known it.
Downstairs, and I didn't think nothing of it at first. So we opened the door, and that's when my heart sank.
And the next thing I know, I've got him on the ground, and I've got him by the collar with a fist, ready to go.
I would love to talk to somebody on how this slipped through the cracks. I don't understand it. I really don't.
Thank you so much for joining me. To see the mugshot of Brian Lee Hendrickson mentioned in this episode, check out bonus material for Plus subscribers. Meanwhile in Mankato, Lies, Silence, and Murder in Minnesota was written, researched, edited, and produced by me, James Woolner. Additional research assistance by Mari Zorb Hansen. If you'd like to learn more, visit dakotaspotlight.com, where you can explore 12 seasons of the show. If you have more information about this story, please send me an email at dakotaspotlight@gmail.com. Thank you again for joining me and for listening to Dakota Spotlight.